Alicante. How beautiful you are this time of year. It is magnificent, grandiose, fresh, and even magical. Carlos drove an open pickup truck along a sandy path cut through the tall trees of the Elche palm grove. September is a time of light, bright warmth. It's time to get out of the hustle and bustle of a million-strong city on the Costa Blanca by the gentle waves of the Mediterranean Sea. The palm grove of Elche was not chosen by chance. It was here 5 years ago that Carlos proposed to Carmen, now his wife, who was sitting on his left hand. Carlos turned his head to his wife and smiled. Carmena returned his smile. She may have gained a lot of weight in 5 years of married life, but she still remained sweet, affectionate, and kind. Probably, it depends not so much on how a person looks, but on how he feels, how he can give good to people and this world. Love and tenderness flooded Carlos's heart. Carmena stared intently at his face, at the strong-willed chin, the thick black stubble that her husband trimmed every day, a strong cartilaginous nose, and tenacious eyes peering at the sandy dirt road. She also felt only love for him. Everything inside seemed to rise and fall quickly. She ran her hand over his knee and began to lift it higher, touching the white shorts, but she didn't stop there either. Carlos liked her slightly plump palms, her skillful fingers, her tenderness and lips in the right place. Obeying a natural desire, he turned off the dirt road to the left onto a wide path along which it was quite possible to go to a secluded place. But when he entered the wide path, he realized that he had made a mistake. The car began to bounce on bumps. Carmena tried at first, but then straightened up, pouted angrily.
You're always going to ruin everything, Carlos.
The man laughed.
Don't worry, Carmen. If I'm not mistaken, there will be a cornflower meadow about a kilometer ahead, where we will stop and spend the night.
Carlos playfully pressed his head against the girl's neck, patted her, and returned to the steering wheel. Carmen looked around.
It's a remote place, Carlos. Oh, look.
2 typhoon birds flew up from a palm branch, 2 small gray birds rare in this place. They opened their wings and flew to the heavens.
2, just like you and me, Carlito.
Hold on, honey.
Carlos stepped on the gas and the car was thrown over a gentle hummock. A clearing was visible through the gap of the primer.
Well, here we are.
Carlos drove straight into the clearing, crushing bushes of some unknown red berries. The sun was slowly sinking towards the horizon.
Honey, we need to quickly find a place for a tent. Put it up.
The man looked up at the sky.
I think there will be huge stars here.
Carmena laughed.
If we have time to watch them. Oh, look. Mango.
The woman in the slates ran straight across the clearing to a lonely tree. Carlos took the hint right off the bat. This meant the following. Everything is correct. You, Carlito, put up a tent, arrange your life. In general, do men's business, while I look around the neighborhood. Anyway, an hour and a quarter later, the tent stood on a convenient hillock covered with rare grass. In the distance, Carlos was fiddling with a portable barbecue and pouring coals into it. Carmen wandered around the clearing and collected large, palm-sized cornflowers. She was weaving wreaths, and one was already decorating her high forehead. She came up from behind and put a wreath on Carlos's head. Of course, I had to forget about the barbecue as well as about romantic conversations, vows, and assurances of love. All this for later. And after a while, Carmelita lay with her head on Carlos's chest, ruffled the short curly hair on his chest, kissed him.
What a savage you are.
Carlos wanted to smoke, but Carmen forbade him to do it in the tent.
Yes, you're a savage too. Listen, let's go out into the fresh air. I want to smoke terribly.
Carlos freed himself from his wife's embrace, lifted his shorts from the crushed cornflower wreath. It's a pity. Crushed in a fit of passion. Carmen came out of the tent just naked, not shy of anyone. The sight was admiring and wounding, touching the delicate fibers in the soul with its grandeur, and simultaneous awareness of its insignificance. The entire sky from the horizon to the cosmic abyss at the zenith was strewn with stars, large and small, pulsating and glowing constantly, moving and frozen in the firmament.
Holy Mother Brigitte, how beautiful it is. God, I never would have thought.
Carmen did not take her eyes off the sky.
In our Alicante, the stars are almost invisible, as in any big city.
Carlos took out his cigarettes and sat down on the grass. I smoked and stared at the stars. Carmen returned to the tent and came out of it. but already in Carlos's t-shirt. He was a big man, and she was right for her feminine, plump physique. Carmina sat down next to him. At that moment, the heavenly miracle began to be complemented by a completely earthly one. Yellow lights began to appear here and there among the grass, cornflowers, and rare shrubs. At first 1, 2, but then many hundreds of fireflies began to illuminate the low grasses. The light of the fireflies lured the moths, which descended to the flowers, smeared themselves in nectar and the secret secreted by the glowing bugs. The wings of the moths also began to glow. Carlos and Carmina were mesmerized by the sight. Hugging and could not look away, moths interlocked in flight, fireflies clung to their paws, forming luminous lumps. The living lanterns were gaining height and falling down, scattering live sparks fading in the wind. Suddenly Carlos heard, or rather not so much heard, as felt movement. Something was moving fast from behind, and there was a dangerous scraping and rustling. Carmen jumped up.
Is that a snake?
Carlos looked around, but saw nothing.
Now wait.
He ran to the tent to get a flashlight, but when he came out of it, he was horrified. Around Carmen, 3 huge creatures crawled on the ground, looking more like ants from the outside. Carmen's face did not express fear, but rather a pleading or ironic expression. One of the creatures reared up on its hind legs. Carlos grabbed the flashlight and rushed forward.
Leave her alone. Go away.
He had no idea what kind of creatures they were, but he rushed forward in an effort to protect his wife.
Run, Carmen, run.
But the woman remained motionless. One of the insect-like creatures, as if from a horror movie, stretched out its long needle-like limbs to the woman, grabbed her and began to lay her on the back of another creature. Carlos howled and ran into the creature holding Carmen.
Let her go.
The creature continued to methodically release thin cords from itself and tie the woman on the back of the second monster. Carmen was laughing like she was crazy. Suddenly, Carlos felt a sense of failure, as if he was flying somewhere into the abyss. Everything turned black. He stopped seeing. A sound formed of clicks and hisses crept into my head, which were replaced by quite distinguishable croaking words in Spanish. The tone was imperious, arrogant.
Calm down, man. You have already been chosen.
Carlos was overcome by indifference, as if everything was not happening to him. Through the darkness, Carlos felt himself being placed on a solid plate of the shell of a giant insect, tied up. He could feel Carmen on his arms and torso. If he could see, he would have seen another creature a little further away, greenish blue, merging with the darkness and the palm grove. It was a huge mantis, raising its long, wedge-shaped, wide paws in front of it, and the waving antennae on its triangular head were directed towards Carlos and Carmen. Pleasant images began to appear in Carlos's head. He couldn't explain why they were pleasant, a charming combination of color and sounds in constant chaotic motion, pleasant to the psyche. It seemed to the man that what he sees now is what he wants. No, he doesn't even want, but he should see at this moment. Carlos was smiling as he passed out. He woke up in an underground grotto with round walls. His head ached unbearably, and Carlos grabbed it with his palms, squeezed and groaned.
It hurts. It hurts.
He fell forward and tucked his legs into his stomach.
It hurts.
The pain drowned out everything. Blinded and deafened, he did not even think about the fate of Carmen at that moment. He was literally going crazy. Leaping up, he accelerated and hit his head against the wall of an underground grotto. The wall turned out to be solid, as if covered with ceramic material. The pain in my head drowned out the pain of hitting the wall. Carlos wanted to hit himself again just to lose consciousness, but the voice in his head sounded again.
Wait, man, you will live.
The pain began to recede, subsided, and after a minute there was no trace of it. The space in the grotto trembled. The air seemed dense, and there was a strong smell of ammonia. His hands were shaking, and so was his head. Carlos looked around. The light source was the walls themselves. They were unevenly covered with a luminous yellowish liquid. Carlos still thought at the time, the light was just like fireflies.
What's going on here? What does it all mean? Who are you?
Everything seemed stupidly strange, but the only thing my mind suggested was the option of kidnapping. They were just kidnapped and drugged before that. But how? From where? When? Thoughts of abduction scattered by themselves when a humanoid creature, dressed in scraps of a red shirt, crawled into the grotto through a narrow hole. The creature rose to its feet and Carlos stared with wide open eyes. It wasn't scary, it was creepy. The creature combined the characteristics of an insect and a human. Quite ordinary hands with pointed chitinous claws, legs with the same horny appendages on the fingers, but instead of human eyes, Two lifeless faceted segments looked at Carlos. Black antennae protruded from his head, like ants.
No, I don't want...
Carlos tried to run away, but the creature blocked his way, grabbed him. Carlos felt soft, fluffy hairs on his skin, like a bumblebee's. The creature held him, hugged him, and then threw him against the wall. The voice was human. The creature opened its mouth, from which short, slobbery mandibles fell out.
Don't move. We know you can handle it. Your female can handle it too.
Carlos got up again and ran at the monster, trying to hit him with his body, knock him down. Fury awoke in my soul, rage, but everything fell away in an instant, collapsed with pain in my head. The creature's voice creaked.
We know you're in pain. Now you will see everything.
The creature did not express any emotions, anger or compassion. It just stared with yellow eyes without pupils, moved short mandibles in its mouth and antennae on its head. Carlos sagged against the wall. He saw Carmen, naked and tipped over backwards, two squat, bent insect-like monsters moving above her. Their bodies consisted of chitinous plates crawling over each other. In some ways, they resembled caterpillars standing vertically. One of the creatures entangled Carmen with tendrils of tourniquets. They strongly squeezed her full legs and arms, held her, and the second creature cut off the woman's limbs without the slightest hesitation. They fell down, but they were immediately taken away by other insects, smaller in size. Blood poured directly onto the ground. Carmen herself laughed, said some nonsense, and did not show the slightest resistance. She stopped laughing only at the moment when the squat creature cut her belly below the navel, and the second one began to lay a swarming larva the size of a spaniel through the incision. There was a sound in Carlos's head.
She's going to give birth.
Carlos couldn't say a word. He was staring in front of him in pain and shock, swaying slightly. It was a stupor. The creature came closer.
And you will be food for future offspring.
Carlos was kept in an underground grotto, not allowed anywhere, and at the same time forcibly fed a sweet liquid mixture. Small creatures, more like bedbugs, crawled into the grotto, pinned the man to the ground. Then another creature appeared, like a fat ant queen, at least 2 meters tall. The uterus trembled, vibrated, and slowly crawled inside, crawled on the man and shoved a bell into his mouth, through which liquid was supplied. The first time the bell knocked out Carlos's teeth, he couldn't even try to bite it off anymore. He just took what was poured into his mouth. At the same time, the bell crept right into the throat, preventing choking or choking. Carlos went crazy. He didn't scream or call for help. He was asleep most of the time, so a week passed, or maybe a month. The creature felt his body every day, pulled off the fat-filled skin. At the end of the required period, Carlos was devoured to the bone by a brood of small newborn hybrids born from insectoids and his Carmen.